7 Hollywood legends who were shockingly short. Never trust what you see in old Hollywood movies. Those tough guys who looked like they could bench press a truck, half of them needed to stand on boxes just to kiss their leading ladies. What I'm about to show you will completely change how you watch classic films forever. You know that feeling when you meet your favorite celebrity and they're way shorter than you expected? Well, imagine if some of the biggest movie stars in history had been doing magic tricks with their height for their entire careers. Today, we're exposing 7 legendary actors who were so short, studios had to dig trenches for their co-stars, build secret platforms, and create custom shoes just to make them look normal on screen. By the end of this video, you'll realize that Hollywood's golden age was built on one massive lie about height. And once you know these secrets, you'll never watch Casablanca or the Maltese Falcon the same way again. Trust me, some of these will blow your mind. Let's start with the most shocking one. Number 1. Allan Lad. He was supposed to be this intimidating tough guy in movies like Shane and This Gun for Hire. The man had those piercing blue eyes and that stone-cold expression that made grown men scared. But here's the thing nobody talks about. He was only 5 feet 6 inches tall. Some people say he was even shorter. Now, you might think 5'6" isn't that short, but in the 1940s, when the average man was around 5'8", and when movie stars were supposed to be these larger-than-life heroes, it was a big problem. Paramount Studios basically turned helping Allan Lad look tall into an art form. First, they paired him with Veronica Lake in 7 different movies. Why? Because she was only 4'11". Standing next to her, Lad looked like a giant without needing any tricks. It wasn't about their chemistry on screen, though they had plenty. It was pure height strategy. But when Lad had to work with normal-sized actors, things got creative. During the filming of Shane, director George Stevens literally had his crew dig trenches in the ground. Not for dramatic effect, but for the other actors to stand in. Jack Palance and Van Heflin had to stand in these holes so they wouldn't tower over Lad. They called them Lad trenches, and they became standard practice in Hollywood. When trenches weren't practical, they built platforms. These weren't small apple boxes either. We're talking about custom-built structures that followed Lad around the set. The crew nicknamed them Lad boxes. Camera operators learned to shoot from low angles to make him look more imposing. Costume designers gave him pinstripe suits and high-waisted pants to make his legs look longer. His shoes had custom lifts that added 2 to 3 inches. But here's what's really interesting. All this height trickery might have actually made Lad a better actor. Because he couldn't move around too much without messing up the illusion, he developed this really intense, minimal style of acting. He'd stand perfectly still and let his eyes do all the talking. It became his signature look, and it was incredibly effective. Number 2. James Cagney. He is probably the toughest guy who ever appeared on screen. In movies like White Heat and The Public Enemy, he was this explosive force of nature who seemed like he could take on anyone. But the truth, he was only 5'5". The crazy thing about Cagney is that he didn't seem to care about being short. He once said, "I don't care how tall I am or how short I am. I care about whether I can act." This attitude made working with him easier because he was willing to do whatever it took to make the movie work. Warner Brothers developed what they called the Cagney angle, a slightly low camera position that made him look taller without being obvious about it. They also surrounded him with shorter supporting actors whenever possible. When they couldn't avoid tall co-stars, directors would have Cagney sitting while others stood, or they'd put him on staircases during the big confrontation scenes. But Cagney's secret weapon was his energy. The guy moved like he was powered by electricity. He'd bounce, jump, gesture wildly, and explode with emotion. All that movement created such a commanding presence that you never had time to think about his height. Film critic David Thompson said Cagney moved like a coiled spring, and that his energy made him seem bigger than he actually was. Warner Brothers' publicity department listed Cagney as 5'9" in all their official materials, 4 inches taller than he really was. But when people met him in person, they were always shocked. Cagney himself joked about it later, saying, People expected him to be much bigger, and that maybe it was a compliment to his acting or to the camera crew who helped create the illusion. Number 3, Edward G. Robinson. Edward G. Robinson created some of the most terrifying gangsters in movie history. In Little Caesar and Double Indemnity, he was this intimidating force who seemed to dominate every scene. You'd never guess he was only 5'8". What made Robinson different from other short actors is that directors didn't just try to make him look taller, they found ways to make him psychologically dominating instead. They'd position him behind desks while other actors stood in front of him, creating this power dynamic where height didn't matter. In confrontation scenes, Robinson would invade other actors' personal space, getting uncomfortably close in a way that felt threatening on screen. Robinson also had this incredible voice, sharp, forceful, and slightly nasal. Director John Huston said Robinson had a voice that made him 10 feet high. He could fill a room with sound in a way that made his physical size irrelevant. Warner Brothers listed Robinson as 5'9" in official biographies and carefully controlled which journalists could meet him in person. They'd schedule interviews at seated events whenever possible to avoid height comparisons. The interesting thing is that Robinson's height might have actually made his gangster characters more believable. Film critic Roger Ebert pointed out that Robinson's smaller size made his gangsters more psychologically complex. Here was a man who had to be tougher and smarter just to survive in a world full of bigger men. That desperation and determination came through in his performances. Number 4, Mickey Rooney. At 5'2", Mickey Rooney was one of the shortest major stars in Hollywood history. But in the late 1930s and early 1940s, he was MGM's biggest moneymaker, headlining the Andy Hardy movies and starring in musicals with Judy Garland. Rooney's situation was unique because MGM initially marketed his short height as a good thing. He was playing teenagers in the Andy Hardy series, so looking young and small worked perfectly. The problem came later when he wanted to play adult roles. For those mature parts, MGM used all the usual tricks: shoes with 3-inch lifts, low camera angles, platforms for taller actors to stand on. Cinematographer Harold Rawson developed special lighting techniques to make Rooney's shadow look longer on walls, which subliminally suggested he was taller than he was. But what made Rooney special is that he eventually learned to use his height for comedy. Instead of always trying to hide it, he'd sometimes play roles where being short was part of the joke, especially when paired with much taller actresses. This showed incredible adaptability that kept his career going for over 80 years. Rooney had a great attitude about his height. He once said, "I'm not a tall man, but I stand among giants in this business." Director Clarence Brown, who worked with Rooney on multiple films, said Mickey had more talent in his 5'2" frame than most actors twice his size. Number 5, Humphrey Bogart. This one might shock you. Humphrey Bogart, the guy from Casablanca and the Maltese Falcon, wasn't the imposing figure he appeared to be on screen. While Warner Brothers claimed he was 5'10", he was actually closer to 5'8", and some sources suggest he might have been as short as 5'6". When Bogart was playing villains and supporting characters in the 1930s, nobody cared about his height. But once he became a leading man with movies like The Maltese Falcon, Warner Brothers had to get creative. They created something called the Bogey Box, a portable platform that Bogart would stand on when sharing scenes with taller co-stars. This was especially obvious in Casablanca when he was acting opposite Ingrid Bergman, who was 5'9". Director Michael Curtiz had to carefully block their scenes so you wouldn't notice that she was taller than him. Bogart was often positioned on steps, or Bergman would be sitting when they appeared together. Cinematographer Arthur Edison developed specific lighting and camera techniques for Bogart that created the illusion of height and presence. They used low camera angles and strategic shadows to make his silhouette look longer. But here's something interesting. Bogart's famous hunched posture and head tilt weren't just part of his tough guy image. They actually helped disguise height differences when he was standing next to taller actors. His minimalist acting style, where he stayed relatively still and let his face and voice do the work, helped maintain all these height illusions without disrupting them. Number 6. Sammy Davis Jr. Sammy Davis Jr.'s extraordinary talents as a singer, dancer, actor, and comedian made him one of entertainment's most versatile performers. His dynamic stage presence created such a commanding aura that many fans were shocked to learn he stood only 5'3", one of the shortest major male stars in Hollywood history. What makes Davis's case fascinating is how his height limitations may have contributed to his legendary work ethic. As a black performer facing both racial discrimination and height challenges, Davis developed extraordinary versatility and technical perfection that helped him transcend both barriers. Davis's musical performance style naturally distracted from height issues. His dynamic dancing, unanimated expressions, and powerful singing voice created such a commanding presence that audiences focused on his performance rather than his physical dimensions. For film roles requiring more conventional leading man presence, Davis used various height enhancement techniques. He consistently wore specially designed elevator shoes that added 2 to 3 inches, both on and off screen. His trademark high pompadour hairstyle added additional visual height. Davis's Rat Pack performances with taller stars like Dean Martin and Frank Sinatra could have created awkward visual contrast, but the group cleverly incorporated choreography and staging that minimized direct height comparisons. Their performances often featured Davis in dynamic motion, while others remained stationary, creating visual energy that distracted from physical differences. Unlike some stars who were sensitive about their height, Davis occasionally incorporated self-deprecating humor about his stature into his performances. During one Rat Pack show, when Dean Martin made a subtle joke about Davis's height, he immediately fired back, "I may be looking up at you physically, but musically you're looking up at me." Number 7. Frank Sinatra. Frank Sinatra's legendary status as The Voice and his magnetic screen presence made him one of the 20th century's most iconic entertainers. What many fans didn't realize was that the man who projected such commanding charisma stood only 5'7" and possibly less. What made Sinatra's case interesting is that his initial fame as a singer created an image in people's minds before they ever saw him in person. The power of his voice was so commanding that listeners naturally assumed he must be physically imposing too. When Sinatra began his serious acting career, particularly after his Oscar-winning performance in From Here to Eternity, studios employed various techniques to enhance his physical presence. He consistently wore custom elevator shoes that added 2 to 3 inches in film appearances. Cinematographers used low camera angles to create a more imposing silhouette. Directors carefully managed Sinatra's scenes with taller actresses and actors. When paired with taller leading ladies like Doris Day or Deborah Kerr, blocking arrangements would keep Sinatra on higher ground or have the actresses seated during key scenes. Sinatra's legendary status and powerful personality actually helped reinforce his screen presence, regardless of physical dimensions. His well-known connections to powerful figures created an aura of authority that transcended mere physical stature. As director Gordon Douglas once observed, Frank carried himself like the most important man in any room, and because he believed it, everyone else did too. What distinguished Sinatra from many shorter actors was his apparent comfort with his height off-screen. While he consistently wore lifted shoes in public, he didn't seem particularly sensitive about height comparisons. This confidence extended to his relationships with significantly taller women, including his marriage to Mia Farrow, who at 5'9" visibly towered over him in public appearances. These 7 remarkable performers reveal the extraordinary lengths Hollywood went to maintain one of its most carefully guarded secrets: that many of their biggest male stars weren't physically imposing at all. From Allan Lad's famous trenches to James Cagney's explosive energy that distracted from his size, from Humphrey Bogart's hidden platforms to Frank Sinatra's custom elevator shoes, these height deceptions required coordinated efforts from virtually every film department. What's most striking is how successfully these techniques fooled audiences for decades. In an era before internet scrutiny and behind-the-scenes documentaries, movie fans largely accepted what they saw on screen without question. The careful lighting, strategic camera angles, and meticulous height management created convincing fantasies that allowed viewers to focus on performances rather than physical realities. Perhaps the most valuable lesson from these stories is recognizing how arbitrary Hollywood's physical standards have always been. These 7 actors overcame significant height limitations to create legendary careers, proving that authentic talent and screen presence ultimately matter far more than physical dimensions. As James Cagney once said, "It's not how tall you stand, it's how tall you stand in people's hearts." For these giants of the silver screen, their cultural stature has far outlasted any temporary illusions created by Apple boxes and camera angles. Which of these stars shocked you the most? Drop a comment below and let me know if you'll ever be able to watch these classic movies the same way again. And if you want to discover more Hollywood secrets that studios tried to hide, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell for notifications.